the reason that for this military buildup and the reason for the sinkings of these speedboats has far less to do with drugs than it has to do with oil.
What are your reflections on the way that the Department for War, the Pentagon press operation is now working, and not all journalists, not all outlets are being treated equally? That feels quite dangerous to me.
Well, the Pentagon has long sought to control information, and you can go back to the Vietnam War and the release of the infamous release of the Pentagon Papers, the study that was performed on Vietnam and then subsequently leaked to the New York Times. So this, while it's nothing new for the Pentagon, the reach of the attempt here to control what goes in and out of the Pentagon is unheard of. The Pentagon at least paid lip service to the American Constitution's First Amendment, freedom of the press, but today there's not even a semblance of that. The Pentagon believes that the media should simply be or perhaps not all of the Pentagon, but certainly Hegseth and his cronies believe that the Pentagon should simply be a mouthpiece for the Trump administration. And the press corps, good for them, refuses to do that. I think we have two institutions here in this country that absolutely are our last line of defense, and that is the press corps and the courts. So far, the trial courts, the federal trial courts, have stood up to Trump, with the intermediate appellate courts doing so also. Now we'll see whether the Supreme Court does or not. But I'm appalled at what Hegseth is trying to do with the press corps. And of course, this echoes what they have done with the senior ranks of the military. They fired all of the top lawyers in the military. I was speaking this morning with a recently retired Judge Advocate General Corps officer who was very senior, held a general officer rank, and the administration doesn't want anyone who is going to voice any objections to their goals. Clearly what's going on in the Caribbean, what's going on with sinking these alleged drug boats, violation of law of war, violation of international law, violation of U.S. law, but all of the top JAGs are gone. And now Hegseth has announced that he wants to detail, that is, send out JAGs, as the lawyers are known, out of the Pentagon, out of the military, and put them on the border to deal with border crossings. That's not a proper use of a military lawyer.
No, I agree. And it goes again to that point about the moral components of fighting power and the trust that troops have to have in the legality of orders, because the risks that they take on the back of those orders are mortal. And they have to believe unquestioningly that what they're being asked to do is thought through and legal. Very, very worrying. General, when I as a British Defence Minister, if I visited Indo-PACOM, CENTCOM or EUCOM, I was always very, very clear that we were the junior partners and that the Americans were 100 times more committed in that theatre. The one place I could go and feel like I was equally committed to the theatre was to your Southern Command in Miami, where our frigate in the Caribbean was about the equal of the kind of the Coast Guard cutters that the US had there. Not so. I think Southern Command are on their way to being kind of the war fighting headquarters, while CENTCOM, Indo-PACOM and EUCOM hold their beer. Is this real? Are we actually going to see the US at war with Venezuela?
Well, I'm very, very concerned about what's going on with Venezuela, and of course, the reason that for this military buildup and the reason for the sinkings of these speedboats has far less to do with drugs than it has to do with oil. If Donald Trump proceeds with the sanctions against the secondary sanctions against Russian oil, as he's promised to do, although we all know Trump is infamous for saying he's going to do something and then backing down. That's why here in this country, Trump is sometimes referred to as taco. That is, Trump always chickens out. Should he proceed with these secondary oil sanctions, that is going to force China and India to go into the world market and buy oil. What happens then? The price of oil is going to skyrocket. One thing that every American president over the last dozen or so have learned is that you don't mess with the price of gasoline in the United States. That will get you into deep hot water with voters quicker than anything else. So Trump absolutely must keep the price of oil down. How do you do that? You can do that by seizing Venezuelan oil. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, like something on the order of 4 times that of the U.S., which is now the world's largest oil exporter. So what do we do? Well, and by the way, Venezuela today exports less oil than it did 30 years ago. They produce less oil. Why? Because of corruption, because of U.S. oil embargoes, and the Venezuelan oil fields simply can't produce. Who are the greatest oil production engineers in the world? Who are the greatest folks at being able to bring back old oil fields? The U.S. We've done that. The U.S. today is the world's largest oil exporter. So that's the reason for this pressure on Venezuela. It has little to do with drugs. Had it to do with drugs, then as you point out, it would be the U.S. Coast Guard. It would be aided by the Brits, our DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, and other counter-narcotics law enforcement would be doing this. So this is simply a plan on the part of the Trump administration to ensure that U.S. companies can get that oil, produce that oil, and keep world oil prices down.
So, and is it, ignore the legitimacy of whether that should or shouldn't be the policy of the United States, but could this cause Maduro to fall? Is this a workable plan?
Well, Maduro, Venezuela certainly doesn't have a military that can begin to compete with the U.S. There are sources today that are saying we're going to strike within Venezuela within hours, if not within days, if not hours. I anticipate that the U.S. could overwhelm Venezuela in short order. And in fact, let's look at the military forces that are being moved into the region. If we were actually going after drug boats, you don't use the world's largest aircraft carrier to do that. You use cutters and smaller aircraft and boats like the Coast Guard possesses to go after drug couriers. Now, this is the beginnings of a major military move. I suspect that the hope is that Maduro will cave when he's faced with this overwhelming military power. But I think in order to do so, he'll have to be offered something to leave Venezuela. Dictators don't do well when they're forced out of power as a general rule.
I wonder when the last time Southern Command had an operational carrier group in their region. I mean, it is an extraordinary statement of intent from the United States to be. This is the sort of capability that you think of as being in the Sea of Japan or in the Persian Gulf, or in the sort of North Atlantic looking for the Russians. This is a war-fighting capabilities. America's premier war-fighting capability, now in the Caribbean, parked off the north coast of Venezuela. It is extraordinary.
It is. It absolutely is. And what that has done is it has pulled that carrier group out of the Mediterranean, out of a sea where they can quickly respond to problems with Russia, to problems in the Middle East. And that, to me, is a huge misuse, a huge waste of military power. Do we really need a carrier battle group in the Mediterranean? Who's going to challenge us there? It's certainly not going to be Cuba or Venezuela or China for that, or Russia for that matter. They don't have the capabilities to put a significant force there. So this is using military resources that are really far more useful in other places, whether it be the South China Sea or the Sea of Japan to counterbalance China, or North Korea, or in the Mediterranean to counterbalance forces that might create a problem in whether it be Iran or Russia. This is not a wise use of military forces.
Whilst they're in the region, though, I was wound up very effectively by some US military strategists who were talking about the growing Russian and Chinese presence in the Western Caribbean, and how that could very conceivably create an anti-access area denial challenge to the United States into the eastern entrance to the Panama Canal. And they were concerned about that, when it comes to reinforcing the Pacific Fleet from the Atlantic, when it becomes to the US interest around trade in the region, that growing Russian and Chinese presence in the Western Caribbean made sense as a strategic threat to the US. And so, all of a sudden the US, I take your point about the capability being lost from the Mediterranean, where arguably the Russian and Iranian threat is more pressing. But the US investing in its near abroad and securing its sphere and its sea lines of communication is a strategically sound thing to do, even if I'm not sure that's necessarily what's in Hegseth or Trump's thinking.
Well, certainly we want to prevent the Chinese from gaining a foothold in the Caribbean, whether it be Venezuela or Cuba or elsewhere. But at this point, certainly there is no military capability in that region that can in any way challenge our overwhelming ability to project force there. So any claim that this carrier battle group is going there to counterbalance the Chinese is so far overblown that it's risk being ridiculed.